For breaking that down, and we continue our team coverage with legal analysis of that verdict.
Juliet Sorensen, law professor at Northwestern University, joining us now to discuss it. Hello, Professor. How are you?
I'm fine. How are you?
Good. You heard Donald Trump after the announcement today that he was guilty on all counts, that this was a rigged system, that they were against him. It was the Biden administration. Where is the truth in that?
I would ask former President Trump what evidence there is of that. First of all, the Manhattan District Attorney has nothing whatsoever to do with the Biden administration or the United States Department of Justice. This is a local district attorney in New York City who prosecuted New York State crimes. The jury found him guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. President Trump was convicted by a jury of his peers, again, 12 citizens who have nothing whatsoever to do, to my knowledge, with the Biden administration.
And we know how Donald Trump will be, making political hay out of that. We've been talking about the political fallout from this, but since we have you, let's talk about the legal implications. What will be the end result from this? Because we know we've been talking about it not being jail time. So what will happen to Donald Trump because of this 34-count guilty verdict?
It's impossible to say today, although we have an idea of what the universe of possible penalties could be. So President Trump was convicted of 34 felony counts. Each of those charges carries a maximum of 4 years imprisonment. If I were a betting woman, I would bet that it's unlikely that the judge will sentence former President Trump to 4 years consecutively on all 34 counts. He could well sentence him to some prison time, however, perhaps also in combination with probation, home confinement, or another penalty.
Professor, what impact, if at all, could this have on his 3 pending criminal cases?
Ideally, it should have no impact. There may be a practical impact. That is to say, if President Trump were taken into custody and began serving a prison sentence while his other criminal trials began, then there would be some perhaps logistical challenges in transporting him to face trial in those other jurisdictions. But the jury is instructed to consider only the evidence that is presented to them in that courtroom on those charges, and every element of the charge defenses to determine whether or not the prosecution has met its burden of proof. The fact that Donald Trump was convicted in a courtroom in Manhattan really has nothing whatsoever to do with what the jury will consider in Florida.
But let's be honest, these jurors are all human beings. They filled out questionnaires here, but they're adjudicating someone who is arguably the most divisive person that we know today. How were they able to separate that and just focus on what was presented to them in the courtroom?
Well, that's really the most interesting question to me, because our criminal process is predicated on the assumption that no one is above the law. That said, there are ordinary citizens, and then there are extraordinary citizens. And former President Trump is surely extraordinary. The criminal process may treat him the same way as any other defendant, but ultimately, what will this conviction and the fact of who he is play into the sentence he receives and, of course, the presidential election?
Professor, clarify this for people listening and for me. He can't, as a convicted felon, he cannot vote in an election, or he can, and he can run for office, right?
Yes. So you're actually considering a question of federal law and a question of state law there. So there is nothing in federal law that bars former President Trump from running again for president of the United States in light of his felony conviction. However, he is registered to vote in the state of Florida, and the state of Florida provides that felons must complete their penalty, whatever it is, if it's imprisonment, if it's supervised release, whatever it might be, they must complete that term before being permitted to vote again.
Could this, as a result of this conviction, change federal law in the future? As far as someone who's convicted being able to run for office?
So I think that a change in federal law would involve an act of Congress.
Okay.
And it would subject to the Constitution, which is silent on criminal process in the President of the United States. The Constitution speaks to impeachment. President Trump was impeached twice when he was our president, but it doesn't say anything about criminal prosecution.
As we go forward to the election, though, let me ask you about this. You know, if it's supervised release, whatever are the conditions that he'll have to adhere to, how does that affect his ability to campaign, to go out around the country and try to get people to believe that he is fit for office?
I have to imagine that could make it very challenging. Of course, we live in a digital age, and President Trump can do a lot by Zoom or by his social media channels, but he is a talented politician, and his great talent lies in stirring up crowds at live rallies, old-fashioned politicking, shaking hands, pressing the flesh. And it remains to be seen if that will be permitted in light of this conviction.
And mugshots on a T-shirt. Professor Sorensen, glad to have you with us. Thanks for joining us tonight.
Thank you.
And stay with WGN as we cover the historic verdict in former President